Near 60 Americans died from the hands of a madman in Las Vegas during a country music festival. My thoughts and positive vibes go out to whoever lost a child, brother, sister, or loved one in this unexplainable event of pure slaughter. This is a dark time for America. Last year, we saw the previous record for casualties in a mass shooting, which happened in Orlando, Florida. These events are becoming more frequent, and I think it's time to take a look at where America is at culturally. The shooter broke every law possible concerning guns, and no gun laws or any laws for that matter could have prevented this madness. We can't have a knee-jerk reaction calling for legislation when we are on the emotional heels of a mass slaughter of American citizens. As of right now, there are more questions than answers, and I hope people can keep an open mind moving forward. We are the people of Mercury. I am your interplanetary host, Travis Montgomery. These views reflect one planet and one planet alone. What's happening, everybody? Welcome to Mercury's Cast, episode 74. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Las Vegas shooting. So with that said, welcome back to the program, Josh Ferguson.
Thank you.
The man of the hourly struggle. See what I did there? The man of the hourly struggle.
It was nice. It was nice. Well done.
And first-time guest, Yeti, who has a pretty decent following on Periscope, I'd say. I enjoy your videos. I was just turned on to him from a mutual friend, from our buddy Jay, and I heard you talking about in some great detail about the weapons when all we had was that one short video of the bursts. So again, thank you for coming on, Mr.
Thanks,
Yeti. How are you doing tonight?
Outstanding. I can't complain.
Right. Thank you. I mean, I guess you can, but then no one listens and no one really cares.
Exactly. It's pointless, but why not?
All right. So it's, here we are again. Somebody crazy. I guess we don't need to mention this guy's name too much. Stephen Paddock, by all accounts, seemed like a normal-ish guy, except he had some money, liked to gamble, real estate dude. And the thing that my take on him is that, everyone wants to say that he was a normal guy and that mental illness was probably not a factor here. Well, somebody with that capacity for evil definitely has a mental illness, in my opinion. I don't know if anyone wants to piggyback off of that.
I agree. Listen, the way he set it up, the planning that went into it, the massive amount of casualties that he produced, normal people don't do that. I wholeheartedly agree that he has some type of mental illness going on. Normal people don't do that.
It based on the information, the early information that came out, and a lot of the information is wrong, but what they said is that he had, we're looking at like 23 firearms, a video system to see when the police were showing up. He brought a hammer to break the windows. I mean, that's not your, what was it, Dylan Roof, who killed his mom and took the guns, and I think that was the guy from was he
a church shooter, right? Or no, that was Sandy Hook.
That was Sandy Hook. He stole his mom's legally obtained firearms, killed her, what have you, and went up to Sandy Hook. I mean, that was just like, that seems like, I'm something snapped and I went and killed people. This guy premeditated the whole thing. I mean, that's a whole different level of psychosis. We're not talking about somebody who, it's kind of like, it reminds me a little, the closest proximity I can think of is the DC sniper, right. John Muhammad, I think his name was, where he had an area in the car like built out to where they could shoot, the younger guy could shoot from the trunk.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was literally premeditated, and they weren't just going out, plinking at people. They were actually, planned out how they were going to do this and how they're going to get away, how nobody was going to see them. This is what's happened in Vegas, where it was just completely premeditated on a scale we don't ever see.
Right, and they knew that he waited for the headlining event of the last event and the headliner where there would be the most amount of people to inflict the most amount of slaughter, which that's not normal. Nothing about that's normal.
Yeah, I mean, pre-booked a corner room, it's
almost like from a shooting standpoint, He picked a firing position. He knew where his targets were going to be, or his target area. He picked not only he picked a corner suite, so he had two different positions to fire from, which would basically, if there were two actual gunmen, I mean, that's the perfect setup. You have triangulation of fire where you can have crossing fields of fire from an elevated position, and that's pretty much sudden death. It's the worst way to be ambushed. The only way to survive that is to run up against the building in the defilade. But he was a lone shooter, multiple weapons, so premeditative. And think about it, a concert is like it's like being corralled like cattle. You're surrounded by gates that stop you from accessing other areas, so the people have nowhere to run. They have nowhere to hide. They're basically, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And the fact that he preconceived the option of two different firing positions just adds to the fucking crazy even more. Pardon my French.
No, it's legit. I mean, and it's the hard part is that so little information has been released that I remember one of the first stories I saw was talking about how they were locked in and they didn't know why, and it fueled all these sort of conspiracies. And I'm like, because you're at a concert. Any way to get out is a way to get in, and they want money from people coming into the show. Of course, there's these fences. Of course, there's no easy way to get out. I used to take photos at concerts, and it was always a hassle getting in. It's always the case. So of course, it was it was fish in a barrel, because like, where are you going to go? You go back out to the exit, or like at one point, I think there were people like I actually know somebody who was just got back from there. And the family got separated, and they ended up like the father hid behind something, from what I've been told, while his wife and kids took off, and a fence, because it's right by McLaren Airport, a fence got knocked over, and people were hiding in one of the hangars. So they enough people got up to it that they pushed a fence over to get through, because they were fleeing. And
sure, and listen, just to touch on that point, I mean, how many people spend $150, $200 on a concert ticket and wind up leaving, especially if it's during the week, and wind up leaving before the encore because they don't want to get stuck in the melee of trying to get out of there,
It's like going to a Dodger game. Everybody leaves at the seventh inning because of the traffic in Chavez Ravine. It's the same thing. You just, I'm out.
I don't know. There's a lot of dedicated Dodger fans that will stay till the end. Not Angel game, maybe.
They'd have to show up for the game first.
Yeah. Jeez Louise. But anyways, going back to the guy, his dad was a notorious bank robber and escaped prison at one point, which, and going back to what his brother has said about the family, that, they weren't the best kids growing up, and probably weren't the most, I guess, law-abiding citizens to begin with, even though he had no criminal record. And as far as questions are concerned, yeah, there's, I'm not willing to just sign up for the narrative that's being given to us right now. Either the single shooter thing, and then the videos that show, which have been deleted off of YouTube now, different gunfire coming from different levels of the building. It's just, and somebody being that old, being able to pull all this off on his own and nobody else knowing, seems, all those weapons, I don't know. There's just some missing piece of the puzzle here. And the motive, we have no direct motive yet.
It's tough because you're running up against the sort of disconnected law enforcement where there's a legitimate reason to, in certain cases, to obscure facts because you don't want things known about the victims, or you're still trying to catch somebody, and there's legitimate reasons why you might not release all the information as it comes out. And then there's, horrible incidents like this where the victims are still being identified, but the perpetrator is already dead. There's people are speculating wildly about what happened. And if you want to calm people down, more information is better than less. And we've gotten so little. I remember it hadn't even...
I mean, just to touch upon that point real quick, It's totally by design, because the more information that leaks, it basically compromises their investigation. And they basically want to control the exchange of information, especially between themselves and the media, or leaks in the media, so that they can keep, control of the entire thing. So, listen, I understand why they do that, But like you said, it has such an effect on the public, on the general public, people like us.
Well, we hadn't even, like, I remember when I first saw the story in the morning, my wife woke me up and said, "Holy crap, you're not going to believe what happened." I looked at the story way before I, went to work, or maybe that was Monday or whatever. I don't remember when I looked at it, but I looked at the story, and immediately people were talking and were trying to figure out what type of weapons were used, and they were saying, "Oh, well, automatic weapons have been illegal entirely, with rare exceptions since '86 and really since the 1930s. And you have to go through the ATF, and you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get the background checks, and they're up your ass every 2 years and all that."
Can I address that real quick?
Yeah.
Technically, okay. As of the NFA, or the National Firearms Act of May of '86, I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure. You were able to own and possess automatic weapons if the weapon was manufactured beforehand. After 1986, you had to register it with the government. Now, registration with the government is not expensive at all. It's basically you create a corporation and a trust. You put the weapon in a trust. You get a signature from your local law enforcement authority, which would be the sheriff most of the time. And as long as they run your background and everything is good, you pay a tax, which is known as a tax stamp, and then you are given permission to own that type of weapon. And those rules are actually, they adhere to not only automatic weapons, but silencers or suppressors. However, people now, I'm not 100% familiar with the laws on that. Other types of weapons. So the process itself in getting a Class 3 permit is not very costly. However, it takes a long time, but the cost of automatic weapons, because none have been produced legally that are legal to sell in the country since '85, it killed supply, drove up demand, and basically automatic weapons are usually in a very inexpensive, cheaply made piece of shit. Could run 15 to 20 grand. A belt-fed weapon, like an actual machine gun, a medium machine gun, could be $50,000 to $75,000 in used condition. An old military weapon. So, just to draw the distinction between the process of legally owning, inexpensive, but the weapons themselves are ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I appreciate the correction. But again, it is because of that, it is expensive to do it. But people, because of that, because the unlikelihood of him having an actual, truly automatic weapon, people immediately started questioning what was he using. And it was he using a GAT crank, which is a device that I was watching videos on it where per every revolution you can get 3 rounds chambered and fired, and so you can just turn this crank and it'll both go through your magazine. Or was he using a bump stock, or was he using a modification to be able to shoot faster? And nobody knew. No, obviously, nothing was released. Nothing still has been released. And so everyone was.
But Yeti had some after it happened. He went live on Periscope, and you had some theories on it, and you even said it. It sounded maybe like 2 different shooters at one point, or at least 2 different guns.
It was yeah. Okay, real quick, just to describe.
And maybe you can give us a little bit of background, because I don't know how much background you want to give, but you are well versed on the topic, on these subjects.
Yeah,
correct?
I mean. I'll give you a little bit of background. I'm a 42-year-old man. I've been a gun enthusiast my entire life. I opened a pawn shop with my uncle when I was 15. I went to the Marine Corps at 22 years of age, and I've always liked things that go boom. I'm not a crazy pro-Second Amendment guy. I'm not a hoarder. I'm not a prepper. I'm an enthusiast. I enjoy sending a small piece of lead in a specific direction and hitting something, hitting what I'm fucking aiming at. The reason I was able to tell that there were 2 different weapons fired that night is very, very easy. If you've ever served in the military, you know what an M16 sounds like. There's a crack because of the velocity of the round. It breaks the sound barrier for the most part. It travels faster than the speed of sound, therefore breaking the sound barrier. And there's a very audible crack that you hear, like. Plus the gunpowder blowing up. So very, very distinct sound. The other weapon, which was a 308, has another very, very distinct sound. It's slower than the speed of sound, so it doesn't have the audible crack, but it's got a throaty almost a larger caliber. You can hear the larger caliber and the diameter. A lot of times in combat, you have guys with M16s versus guys with AK-47s, and you hear them shooting at each other, and you can discern the difference between the caliber of weapon that's being fired by how it sounds. And when they were playing the live video, I went on Periscope Live playing the video from TV and from clips that people had sent me on Twitter, and it was very clear to hear. And quite honestly, that doesn't make me anything special. It's a very, very, very discernible and distinct crack when you fire a supersonic round. So to the layman, you're only gonna hear a boom. But to somebody who's been around it long enough, you're gonna hear the crack and the boom. And that's pretty much what I heard. So,
no, I don't disagree. Having listened to the videos, I don't disagree at all. I started rifle shooting when I was about 3. That's the earliest photographic evidence I could find of it. And I grew up firing AR-15 before they were banned here in California, before scary gun bans took over here in the States, in California. And the subsonic versus supersonic rounds is absolutely a difference. You hear the crack. I remember there used to be a shooting range. It's been defunct for a long time, but up in the Angeles forest, and you'd have everybody around you, and people sort of used to complain about it because they used to blame gangbangers for coming out there and shooting. But really, from what I knew, it was usually cops and agents coming up there shooting the weapons that they didn't get to normally play with. And you get used to hearing the differences. And I'm very familiar with the AR-15s. And it's one of those things where you hear that, you're right. That's the funny thing. Not to go off topic, but when the way this went immediately political, when the former Democratic nominee for president, when Hillary Clinton came out and said we need to ban suppressors because that's a bill that was coming up in front of the House, everyone thinks it's that little pss, pss sound, from the movies. And reality is that you're talking like if you put a suppressor, which it'll help your hearing, so you don't have to wear giant ear cans to shoot this thing. But if you put a suppressor on an AR-15 or an M16 or a comparable gun, 223 cartridge or a supersonic cartridge, it still breaks the sound barrier. That's what you're hearing. You're hearing that cartridge break the sound barrier, and that's that pop sound.
Right.
Nothing will stop that. So right. I mean, this issue immediately got demagogued in with, yeah.
Well, what actually will stop it is if they have subsonic rounds that are available in 22. It's basically just less gunpowder, a shorter casing, and a slower moving round. So the suppressor does more of its job by absorbing the gases that are released and dissipating the sound of the report of the round. But like you said, even when there's a suppressor on an AR-15 or a 22 long rifle, anything that travels faster than the speed of sound.
That makes it supersonic.
Correct.
Yes. And so now that since we're on this topic, good old Hillary Clinton doesn't waste any time taking to Twitter the morning thereafter. The investigation isn't over. The bodies are still laying on the ground, and she comes out with the most idiotic tweet in a long time where she was just completely wrong. I mean, never mind the politics. The politics set aside, saying that if he could have gotten a silencer, and that would have made it much, the casualties would have been so much more, and it's all your fault, NRA. And can someone break that down on how she was just absolutely wrong? Because I have the answers, but you guys probably sound better.
Well,
I'm not the gun guy here.
As we both just said, it's the first is a fallacy of the fact that silencers don't silence things that much. And remember,
do for the shooter. They're intended.
To a point, but you're still going to hear that unless he's using subsonic rounds, and even then you're still going to hear it. But even beyond that, the issue, well, first of all, she's a demagogue and she doesn't know anything about anything. So that's the first problem. But beyond that, you're looking at an issue where, from what the stories that I read, the reason the police were able to identify where he was shooting from was because the amount of smoke that had been fired from the round set off the fire extinguisher.
Yep.
Or fire alarms. So even if you were using a suppressor to mitigate the sound, the amount of smoke and gas still exists. It still would have set it off. More people wouldn't have died.
Plus, there would
if
be
he was using.
But
yes.
Even with a suppressor, there'd still be a visible evidence that someone was firing from that window because there'd be muzzle flash. So.
Yeah, it was. So, like normal, she has zero idea what she's talking about. I actually was less concerned about what Hillary Clinton said because she's a nitwit than I was about here in California. Our assembly speaker, the head of the California, I mentioned this on my own podcast and I talked about this, is the head of the California Democrats in the Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon, and I'm going to quote this because it pisses me off so much, says, "The police say the shooter appeared to have acted alone. That's not true. Every gun lobbyist and the politicians who do their bidding were all in the room with him. We have to make this stop, and we can with courage and political will." I mean, you want to talk about demagoguing an issue. Congratulations, you believe in the Second Amendment even as an enthusiast. You were in the room with him. I mean, I don't remember Anthony Rendon saying that everybody who worked for Planned Parenthood was in the room with Kermit Gosnell. You know, it's this one-sided, we hate that issue, we need to demagogue it, how can we make ourselves look like we're anti-scary gun? And it's really frustrating.
Truth be told, though, however scared you are of guns, it's not the guns that kill people. It's people who kill people. I mean, granted, a gun makes a more efficient weapon than a knife, but if you want to deal with the actual problem and stop trying to politicize a constitutional right or politicize the erasing of a constitutional right, you know, deal with the issue at hand as opposed to the tools that were used during the issue. Like, that might sound a little naive.
No, it's not. It's not.
No, it's not. It's not at all.
I believe, and I posted it yesterday on Facebook, that we have a morality problem in America right now, and maybe for the last however so long. And then, granted, when you have 350 million so-odd people in a given space, there's going to, just the numbers are going to tell you that there's going to be some crazy people.
But you're going to get into that. I mean, I'll counter that with a couple points. One, the biggest attacks that we hear about often, Boston, was that a shooting? No, they used pressure cookers. 9/11, biggest mass murder in the Western world. They used planes. You had the London bombing. You had I actually had a friend who was in Nice, France when that truck attack happened, and people were worried if she was going to survive or not. Nobody knows. I'm going to read his name because I don't know it off of hand. But Anders Behring Breivik, who killed 77 people in Norway. I mean, he used firearms. But it's like, it's not just a Western thing. It's not just an American thing. It's not just a firearm thing. Horrible things happen. And the thing that I always go to with this is, it's stupid, and I admit it, so I apologize ahead of time. But it's the movie Kill the Irishman. Okay? It talks about the mafia battle between the Irish and the Italian mobs in Cleveland back in the 60s. And at the end of the movie, they say that there were something like 25 bombings in 1 year in Cleveland. I mean, do let that sink in for a minute. Imagine and Cleveland isn't a major metropolitan area like Los Angeles or Chicago or New York. It's metropolitan, but it's not like what we're used to out here. But right. Imagine any major metropolitan area having 5, let alone 25 bombings in 1 year. I mean, it's ludicrous to think of that things have gotten worse now than they were before. The difference is now is that we're connected to everything.
Exactly.
We know of every single shooting, every single killing, and my wife complains about exactly. My wife complains about this, like on Facebook, where you see every dead baby story that ever exists anywhere pops up on your Twitter and Facebook. And so we're so much more connected to it all that now we think it's worse than it is. It's worse now, when historically it's actually way declined. When the assault weapon ban went away in the 90s, when the Republican Congress refused to renew the assault weapons ban, I think it was 92, the violent homicides dropped. And so it's like there's all these other issues. I mean, I just read a story today about a lady who works for 538, the big statistician group. And she said she's obviously liberal. You can tell by reading it that she was against guns until she read the numbers. And you're like, a vast percentage of people who kill themselves or who use firearms for deaths kill themselves, and then a large number are gang related. And there's not much you can do about that. I mean, England bans their guns, and what happens now? They have turn in your knife programs. Because they have people that are wearing knife-proof vests to school because people are stabbing each other. I mean, you're never going to get rid of the evil in people's hearts, and until we recognize that,
and it's funny. I think that it takes a mass shooting like this to bring up the debate on guns. When Chicago, it's the example that everyone brings up right now, but if you look at what's happened in Chicago this year alone, it trumps anything that happened in Las Vegas, including that shooting.
Well, yeah, I think the Daily Wire had a story that said essentially, what do they call 60 deaths in Chicago? June. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, it goes back to an old. I think I had a sticker or something back in the day that said Teddy Kennedy's car has killed more people than my gun. I mean, and then even beyond that, you run into problems where it's just it ends up just being demagogued issues. Unfortunately, I mean, it's really frustrating.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how our fearless leader handles the situation. Listen, I'm of the opinion that if you outlaw the guns, only the outlaws will have guns. And
actually,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off. Sorry, it's a great point, and I'd like to make a really thing that's really been bothering me about that. Does anybody else? You probably do. Remember the Fast and the Furious scandal?
Yes.
Where were all these big anti-gun people? All the people that wanted all guns banned when our administration, through Eric Holder and through our Attorney General and Barack Obama president, were running guns to Mexican drug cartels and then losing track of them. I mean, the argument against guns essentially is that, and it's the cognitive dissonance of the left. Guns are bad. Guns kill people. You're right. People kill people. Guns don't kill people. But guns are bad. Guns kill people. So we need to ban them and only put them in the hands of the state. Only the state can have them. Like, okay. Well, first of all, it's cognitive dissonance. Because what about the Black Lives Matter thing? Cops are racist. Cops are terrible. Cops indiscriminately kill people. But they should be the only ones who have guns.
Listen, the very existence of the Second Amendment was put there for that reason. It was a gift from our founding fathers to the citizens of the country to ensure that a tyrannical government couldn't take complete control. It was basically like, like a fail-safe that the people would always have the ability to resist the government if it got out of hand. And in fact, to touch on your point, what you just suggested is the polar opposite. It's almost like against what in my opinion, the Constitution is like a recipe for America in a sense, if you think about it. It encompasses our inherent rights and freedoms. And they were given to us for a reason. And people who try to erase that or supersede it or reverse it or take away those rights, in my opinion, have an agenda. And and unfortunately, when you have a tragedy like we did now, it becomes politicized and people's emotions are manipulated and the wedges are driven in and other agendas are secretly working, behind closed doors. There's no doubt. But listen, something needs to be done about mass shootings. Something definitely, it has to be addressed. As they happen and as they start to increase more and more and more, we kind of have to take responsibility for what's actually causing them. And guns aren't causing them. Guns are utilized in the process, but guns aren't the cause. Taking the guns away would be like putting a Band-Aid on a fucking bullet hole. So you're not treating the problem. You're only treating the symptom. The problem.
All right, since we're on this subject. Now a lot of people are calling for bans on certain types of firearms, and the NRA rebuttal to that is that we need these type of weapons to combat the government, and should we need to do that? But in my eyes, I'm like, well, even if we had all the machine guns in the world, there's no way we can combat this government, however tyrannical it could be.
I disagree entirely.
So play devil's advocate here.
I'm going to play the middle.
No, when the Americans fought the British, we kicked the crap out of them because we used different tactics, because of we were fighting for our own soil. Why have we been in Afghanistan for 15 years? Because people are fighting, whether you like it or not, they're fighting for what they perceive as their homeland and their rights. If the government tries to crack down, we outgun them and we outnumber them. They can drive a Bradley down my tank, but at the end of the day, they still have to come through door to door, and they are sitting targets. The problem is what you run into is here in my city in Fullerton, we literally last night, the city council approved 160 AR-15s for my police department. We have 155 sworn officers, including part-time and desk jockeys, but we just gave them 116 AR-15s without questioning it because we're worried about all of these things happening. And the funny thing is, to bring up the point about the Second Amendment, is that the point of the Second Amendment was so the citizens didn't have to fear their government. And more, all of our rules and all of our answers to all of these things are putting more power in the hands of the very government we should be fearing. And that's
not only more power, but militarized power. Difference between the military and law enforcement. There's a tremendous difference between the two, but that line has been blurred. We're militarizing everyday people that, listen, in watching the footage from Vegas, I noticed a couple of the Vegas cops didn't even have ARs. They had shotguns, which means they weren't issued them by their department. You know, how can you have cops that don't have a weapon that deal with the threat, but you have an armored vehicle, a tank, a robot? You know,
it depends. It depends on the jurisdiction. In my city, they actually do have shotguns, which it was funny because my council member last night brought up the fact that he was at an event and they had shotguns and he was worried about the spread. And I was like, but you don't care about a 223 that's a hypersonic round that'll travel through somebody and hit the person behind him?
Right.
These people don't know anything about it. It's worse than that. So I remember there's a book called Rise of the Warrior Cop, and it's by Radley Balko. He used to write for Reason Magazine, then he worked for Huffington Post and Washington Post. He's been on this issue for years. And it was something I remember reading on his site years ago that was fascinating to me because he said the idea that it's the militarization of police is actually an insult to the military. Because you have this issue now where police have all these tactics and all these weapons, and they kick in the wrong doors, or you have that case in Georgia where they threw a flashbang into a house and permanently scarred a toddler in a crib. And the guy was saying, he said, you have to understand, this guy was in Afghanistan, and he said, when I was in it might have been in Iraq, but I think it was Afghanistan. He said, I was in Afghanistan, and when we went after a high-value target, we would block off the street, we would announce our presence. We would tell them we were there. We'd give them a certain amount of time. We would clear out the neighboring residences. We'd give them a certain amount of time to come out. And if they didn't come out by the deadline, then we would use force to go in. Here on our city streets, we get an anonymous tip that somebody's selling a naughty plant or a naughty pharmaceutical product, and we send in a SWAT team to kick in the door with no notice, no nothing. And it leads to tragic incidences. There was a case in Idaho where a soldier a former vet who had PTSD was using medicinal marijuana to cope with it. And instead of catching him on his way to work or anything else, they decided to kick his door in at 9 o'clock at night. He thought he was being burglarized. So he opened fire and he killed one of the officers. And people lost their minds. And it's like, that's the problem, is that once you start looking at these issues, you start going, how do we stop this? How do we control this? Well,
so let me ask you again. You think the citizens have a shot if we're so divided right now that it's never going to fucking happen? Like, matter would have to come with the alt-right, with your classic liberals, with classic Republicans. We all would all have to come together, which is never going to fucking happen with the way it looks right now. But do you think that we have a shot against the government?
Well, you have to. But the problem,
all their tactics.
The problem with that argument is that you have to assume that the government's unified. And I know plenty of men and women who are in our armed forces, who are in our police departments, who are in our government infrastructure, who would, and don't get me wrong, there are people who will do horrible things because they're just following orders or waiting for their paycheck, but there are also plenty who wouldn't. Now, we know that there were cops going door-to-door confiscating guns during Katrina. We know that there are people that will do those things. But if our government became obviously tyrannical, which I don't see happening, it's death by 1,000 cuts. But if they became obviously tyrannical, you have to assume that everybody in the National Guard, everybody in the military and the Marines and everything else would go along with it. And I don't see that happening necessarily.
Okay.
I think...
what do you think about that, Mr. Yeti?
It's hard. It's hard. Quite honestly, as a Marine, you're trained to follow orders. You're trained to do what you're told. You're trained to put your ass in harm's way. You're trained to defend the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic. You raise your right hand and swear to defend that piece of paper against not only foreign enemies, but also domestic enemies. I think that there's been I'm not familiar with what the government operations are called, but, a lot of the conspiracy theorists went crazy. when they were running large-scale operations in the country, in addition to FEMA and the FEMA camps and all that. Kasi Tatapamas, something like that.
It's called Kasi Pomatatis. It's the law. Yeah, it's the law that says that the military cannot be used on domestic soil.
Well,
and it has been suspended on a couple occasions.
Oh, really?
But by and large, the United States military is not supposed to be used on our soil.
No.
And say we should have a revolution every 15 years or something like that. Just to
the Tree of Liberty should be refreshed from time to time. I think it was
the Tree of Liberty. The Tree of Liberty should be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Correct.
Ooh,
and I believe
Mr. Yeti coming through.
Listen, I believe that.
Nice.
I wouldn't say every 15 years. I wouldn't say every 100 years or every 115 years. But liberty or freedom, basically what that statement says to me is that liberty is worth it and freedom is worth it. And people will shed blood for that very thing. So I'm a firm believer in that quote. It's one of my favorites. But just to touch on your previous statement when you said that you don't think guys in the military would actually would actually go door to door and go against their fellow citizens, I'm surprised that you haven't seen more dissent from law enforcement who disagree with what it is that they're being tasked to do, like especially in some of the riot situations or the demonstrations.
That's the scary part. That's the actual scary part, because now I don't think everybody would. Don't get me wrong. So I'll give you an example, and it's totally off topic, but I have to bring it up because it touches on your point. Here in my city, last year on election night of all nights, our city manager got drunk and got into a car accident. Okay, single vehicle collision. The police covered it up, or they tried to. They gave him a ride home. They towed his car. They didn't even give him a slap on the wrist. Nothing. It wasn't until we brought light to it that the DA even got involved. Nothing else. But yeah, we know for a fact that at least one officer cared and was fed up with, and whether it was retribution or payback or just anger. But they had posted on all the local blogs the incident number. It wasn't a case number, but the incident number and what had happened, which gave us something to run with. So you have to understand, do I believe that some people in the military would turn against their fellow citizens on orders? Absolutely. Do I also believe that there are some that wouldn't? Absolutely. And that's the difference. Your point about law enforcement is actually the one that bothers me the most, because I actually think law enforcement is less likely to stand by their fellow citizens than people in the military. Because I have friends and family who have been in the military, and they're like, yeah, we sort of uphold the Constitution, and if the government ever sent us to do that, they can kiss my ass. Whereas with law enforcement, I see corruption all the time. I mean, in my city, we had a guy who was molesting women, and they did on patrol, and they didn't do anything about it. A guy who broke his voice data recorder after he said something to somebody, and the guy ended up killing himself in the jails. They tried to bury it under the rug. I mean, all these corrupt things, and no officer comes forward. Nobody ever comes forward and says, this is what happened, here's the corruption, here's how you deal with it. And they don't even do it anonymously. I mean, this is the age of WikiLeaks. It's not like I'm asking Officer John Doe to step forward and say, badge number so-and-so, Social Security, and here's what I have. They could send information anonymously and say, this is what's happening, here's the data, here's the dash cam video, whatever, and blow it wide open. And they never do. You don't hear that in any jurisdiction. 300 million people in the country. California's got 40 million people where I live. You don't hear that in anywhere. Why? Go watch Serpico. That's why.
Just to touch on that, so like the brothers in arms theory, if you think about it, there's a big distinction between the camaraderie and esprit de corps in like a Marine Corps platoon. There's a tremendous difference than there is with, say, like a watch command in a police department. Not only do they cover for each other, but the way the system is designed, there's a union that protects them legally, no matter what happens. There's a district attorney who they actually work for, collecting the people that the district attorney charges, and he's the person who's going to be doing their investigation. So there's a tremendous lack of oversight right off the bat, and given that lack of oversight, you also have guys that go into battle and put their asses in harm's way on a daily basis, and they develop a bond. And if you think about the thin blue line, are you familiar with the flags with the blue line that represent police? If you do a little bit of research on that and read up on it, it's a very, very clear statement to me where it says that only they can rely on them, and it's almost like an us against them mentality. And when I mention them, it's not criminals, it's not protesters, it's the general public. Because they have an authority that we don't, because they have the combination of lethal force and permission, the badge and the gun, it does something. And some of them, just like any large group, you're going to have a percentage of people that abuse the power, or that have mental issues, or that had a really bad day and act out. But the underlying theme that they stick up for each other is clear. And the fact that the system is designed to help them completely, and it's pretty much, we're at a tremendous disadvantage, whereas they are at a huge advantage.
Well, it even goes beyond that. I mean,
can I just say something real quick? I would like to give a shout out to the cops and the first responders from the Las Vegas shooting that actually were running towards the violence. I think a lot of the times their sacrifice gets overlooked. And even the regular citizens that were helping people out, just feel like we need to give them a little bit of appreciation, because that is a horrifying, scary sight that they were, running. Everyone's running one way and they're running the other way. So yeah. I just want to give a shout out to them.
It takes a lot to do that. And the camaraderie that they have together, I'm not trying to be pejorative about it. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. When you basically go to battle with a group of people, you develop relationships with them. And a huge shout out. Listen, I'm a huge law enforcement supporter. I have law enforcement in my family. A lot of my close friends are in law enforcement. A lot of the guys I was in the Marine Corps with are in law enforcement for the feds and in local agencies. I personally, my issue is with the overall big picture of law enforcement, and it needs to be addressed, especially in the current conditions our country is in, especially with the optics that are being presented. The thing I hate more than anything, I think the most damning thing I've seen so far is cops standing between people who have a right to protest, two different groups who both have the equal right to protest. And it creates such a bad visual image. It almost looks like the police are protecting some of the some of the fringe groups.
I'd like to circle back around to the main topic, but by all means, go ahead for a little bit.
Just 1 second on that. So, are you aware of what's going on in Catalonia right now in Spain?
I am not.
Okay, so Catalonia. Now, don't get me wrong; they're super communist, so it's not really a good thing. But Catalonia is trying to break for independence, and they voted for independence. And if you look, there are pictures from Catalonia where the police came down and were beating people because they were trying to vote for independence. Okay, firefighters showed up in their uniforms and blocked the police. And there's a picture. It's a really hard to look at, but it's a stunning picture of a firefighter just standing there in a line of firefighters where the police are just in their face and they're threatening violence. And so the issue isn't whether, and this is where it gets so divisive in this country. The issue isn't whether you're pro or anti-law enforcement. Unless you're an anarchist, you believe that law enforcement has some sort of function. I have family in law enforcement, friends in law enforcement. I have no animosity towards the principle or the people in law enforcement. My problem is with corruption. And the problem I run into, and this is why it always falls out of the same argument. It's like, oh, well, so here in my city, several years back, several officers ended up getting into an altercation with a homeless gentleman, and they ended up killing him. The altercation started because an officer put rubber gloves on, put his fist up, and said, "See these are going to F you up." And he started the altercation. And it just went sideways from there. There was never, people were fired. I had an assistant district attorney tell me that they were prosecuting in such a way to not get a conviction. That sort of corruption is beyond the pale. Here in California, we have a law called POBAR, which it's a police officer's bill of rights, and it allows officers to get away with things that we would never, as citizens, get away with. You can't lie to them. They have to they can only be questioned for a certain amount of time. There's all these other things, and it sets up this double standard, and it helps perpetuate what you were talking about, Mr. Yeti, that us versus them mentality. I had a friend who went to be a police officer, and he said the hardest part for him was that it really was us versus them, us versus the citizens. All right. And it was really like he didn't understand that. Like it was like, well, should it be us versus the criminals? And it was no, it was police versus citizens.
That is so telling. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. If they see both as one and the same, then they're not doing their job. They're not keeping their oath, and that's where we have the fucking problem. If they can't a distinction between a potential criminal and an actual criminal, or a law-abiding citizen and a criminal, you can't. It's impossible. Nobody can look at somebody and say that guy's a fucking criminal.
But let's let that circle us all the way back. You can't look at somebody and know that they're a criminal. We can't see anything so far in Stephen Paddock's, I think that's his name, history that lends us to believe that he's a criminal. Okay? So everyone wants to say he's not allowed to own weapons or a certain amount of weapons, whatever the case may be, because anybody at some point could have a problem. We'll ignore all of the vehicular deaths that happen. We'll ignore all the other weapons that kill people, but that because it can be a mass issue. But you can't look at somebody and know that they're going to be a threat, and that's where it all falls apart. Because it's not like it's not like Minority Report where Tom Cruise can come in after reading a little wooden ball and tell you who's going to commit what crime when. We don't know, and that's where like I said earlier, evil in people's hearts can't be found beforehand. You don't know when it's going to happen, and if it does, it does. But how many times? Like, so you're an enthusiast. I'm an enthusiast to a very very small degree. Because I can't afford to be an enthusiast at a higher degree. But I look at it and go, okay, most people aren't aware that there are two separate cases in front of the Supreme Court that have come down where the police are not required to protect you. If you call 911 and you say, there's someone coming into my house right now, can you get here? It doesn't matter. If they're next door, they have no legal obligation to protect you. The government has said through the Supreme Court that only you are responsible for your protection. So the idea that we can't protect ourselves from criminals, from a tyrannical government, whatever the case may be, is ludicrous. So now we have to bridge that. Well, what can't you have? Can you have a thermonuclear weapon? Or can you have a more than a 7-round capacity magazine like they tried to ban anything larger than in New York? It gets to that issue. But where it becomes a problem is that the left, and I blame them particularly, has demagogued this issue so heartily. You're, as an enthusiast, let me ask your opinion on this. If you were to say, okay, I'm willing to ban any scary gun, let's call it a semi-automatic AR-15 with whatever attachments the left happens to find scary, unless I go through a background check and I go through training and I get licensed for it. Let's say you're willing to concede that. Do you think the left would agree to it? Or would 6 months in, they'd freak out and try to ban something else?
I mean, technically speaking, I'm a concealed weapons permit holder, so I had to take, I didn't have to take a class. I used my DD-214, but a normal citizen who wants to carry a weapon legally on their body concealed has to be trained, has to fire the weapon in a responsible manner in front of the person who trains them, has to go through a background check, has to be fingerprinted, has to register with ATF and their locals. So in a sense, that kind of already exists. But if you attached it to the weapon itself and not the person, meaning every single weapon someone purchased, they would have to go through some type of training. I think is that what you're asking? I think
No, I'm not in favor of that. My question is, if that happened, let's say we conceded that point, and I'm against it, but if we conceded that point, do you think that would be enough? Because my contention is no. My contention is no matter what. So here in Orange County, I cannot get a CCW. I can't. And the reason I can't get a concealed carry permit is because our current sheriff basically doesn't allow them unless you're law enforcement or former military. Former law enforcement or former military. Because obviously law enforcement would have current ability. But that's a problem. It doesn't matter what my background says. It doesn't matter what I could take a psych eval. I could go down there with training. It doesn't matter. I still can't. And the people that demagogue this issue don't know that. This is why you end up with nitwits like Whoopi Goldberg, whoever, or there was a guy, I think it was a governor or somebody, who said it was 700 rounds per minute. And they're like, oh, well, it's a semi-automatic firearm. Like, that means one trigger pull. Like, unless it's a revolver, every weapon, unless it's bolt action or revolver, they're all semi-automatic.
Revolver's semi-automatic.
You're right. It depends on the action.
It's mechanically semi-automatic as opposed to using the gas from the round.
Correct. You're absolutely right. But but think about it. You have that issue where you got Dianne Feinstein holding an AK-47 or an AR-15 or AK-47 with her finger on the trigger. These people don't know the basics of gun safety, gun issues, anything else, and they're out there running to it like, let's ban X, Y, and Z.
Can you imagine if it just went off? She's like, "This is why we should."
Yeah, and took out the first row. Listen, I think it's ignorance. People are intimidated by guns as a whole, or they're intimidated by the item or the object, and in actuality, it's an extension of your hand. It's no different than a hammer or a knife. I mean, it's a tool. It's a tool used to send a small piece of lead in a specific direction. And people don't understand terms like semi-automatic, automatic, double action, single action. They just hear gun-related speak that they don't understand, and they automatically assume it's a negative thing. Just for the audience, quick definition of semi-automatic, the easiest way to think about it is as fast as you can pull the trigger, the gun will fire until it's empty. Vice automatic, where the gun, as long as there's pressure on the gun, it will continue to fire until it's empty. So another thing that needs to be said is going back, taking it full circle to our original topic in Vegas, they should have been able to pick up those weapons and determine if they were altered, if they were legally bought semi-auto and then altered to go full auto. They should have been able to determine that in a moment. They're in every. Have
you seen pictures of the weapons?
I saw CNN showing what an English newspaper published. I really haven't researched too much because.
Okay, well, hey, you know what? I could bring them up for you right now so we could talk about it.
Okay, there's no clear MO. And I know that they're going to sit on all the information specifically, so I'm sitting on my hands until more information becomes available. Okay.
Can you guys see these pictures?
I'll tell you exactly what those are. They're both AR-15s. The one on the left has got a 50-round magazine.
Right here?
Yep, that one right there. It's got an EOTech sight. It's a pretty expensive setup. It's probably about $1,400 to $1,500 worth of accessories and rails.
Easy.
Is this a bump stock right here?
I can't tell. You'd have to see it from a top view. And I'm not very familiar with bump stocks, but if you look to the left of the column and you see all those stacked 50-round magazines, that's pretty damning right there. That's a whole lot of ammo. I mean, if you count those magazines, there's at least 15 there, and you're talking about 50 rounds in each one.
I count like 17, because there's one over here just to the left of it also. Not counting the one that's also on the firearm as well. There's there's a lot.
And just for the people watching at home, if you look at the weapon on the right, the black one, that's got a 30-round magazine in it. If you look at the weapon on the left, that's got a 50-round magazine on it.
Banana clip. These aren't the same weapons, are they?
I believe they're both AR-15s. One has a bipod attached to the bottom. The other has a forward grip. It looks like there's different optics on top, but it's the exact same rifle and the same weapon system. Same
platform. Here's another picture.
Yeah, I can't really tell that one. So also we close the videos looking. So to an interesting point, what people don't understand is that when people talk about assault weapons, and that's going to be all over the news, it already has. Assault weapon is a made up term. It's a made up term by bureaucrats and demagogues in the Brady campaign. What would make this? So let's stop right there for a second, Travis. The gun on the left here with the bipod. Oh, you moved it. What makes that firearm? Yeah, right here. What makes that firearm an assault weapon in California, where I live, is the pistol grip. It's the part that you put your hand on. Typically, if you're right-handed, you put your right hand on there where the trigger mechanism is. And if you have a forward grip. Now, there's a muzzle brake on this rifle as well, which would make it illegal. If it has 2 of 5 different features is what classifies it as an assault weapon. So if I were to take this rifle on the left-hand side here, and I were to remove that pistol grip, which is possible, AR-15s are very modular, and I were to remove the muzzle brake off of this, obviously that 30-round magazine is illegal in California. It'd have to be 10 rounds or less, and it can't be detachable now. But those features, and I think possibly the The magazine. Yeah, you can't have more than a 10 round magazine in California.
No, that means so fixed magazines. You can't have detachable. You're stuck with, you can't even switch magazines now.
Correct, but there are ways around that with the bullet buttons and other features that you can drop the magazine out very quickly. But yes, it has to be a fixed magazine now in California. It's ridiculous. But you change those 2 or 3 features, and that weapon right there ceases being an assault weapon and just goes back to being a regular weapon, according to California law. So that term means nothing. It's literally a scary gun ban. It doesn't change the lethality of it. It doesn't change the ammunition it fires, the rate of ammunition it fires, the speed the ammunition flies. None of that changes, just the cosmetic features of the weapon.
So, let me just add something. During Clinton's assault weapons ban, basically, if I remember correctly, this was a while ago. This was 17 years ago, roughly. Anything with a bayonet lug, anything with a folding stock, anything with a magazine of 10 rounds or more, anything with you could have a spike bayonet if it was affixed to the weapon, but you couldn't have a blade bayonet, I want to say.
Correct.
One that could be sharpened. And then there was one other thing. It had to do with either the flash suppressor or were flash suppressors considered, if there was a suppressor on the weapon, it was considered an assault rifle.
Correct. It was much like California, where if it had, actually California is worse than that, where if it had, but you're right, that actually was the case. All those things, and none of those changed the lethality of the weapon.
And do you know what that did to the gun industry? By the way, P.S. I got into the pawn shop business in, let's see, I was 75, 85, 95. In 1990, right around 1990, I got into the pawn shop business as a 15-year-old kid. My uncle opened a store, and the assault weapons ban took place while I was on active duty it took place before, and it ended while I was on active duty in the Marine Corps. In 2000, I got out in 2001, and Bush took office that January, whenever they switched over. The gun industry went, when you ban items and you can no longer produce items, it drives the cost of the items that are already produced so far through the roof that it's not even funny. I remember magazines for an AR-15, a regular 30-round magazine used to cost like maybe fucking $12 or $13 for the shitty ones. All of a sudden, you could sell that for $30, and somebody else would buy it from you and then sell it for $40 or $50 at a gun show, as long as it was pre-ban and legal. So it created the ban created not only a huge boom for the manufacturers who knew it was coming, stockpiled everything, let it out slow, and priced it as such, but it also created a secondary market for people like me who were buying and reselling. So the assault weapons ban, in my opinion, was not only pointless because you could still shoot somebody, it just changed the accessories you could use on the weapon to shoot somebody.
And isn't it funny how when they start talking about banning stuff that the gun sells? I mean, it's not funny, but
so
they just start skyrocketing.
Both of those points. I'll go reverse order. When Barack Obama became president, you couldn't buy ammunition or many firearms anywhere because people were worried they were going to be banned or the Democratic majority, and people just bought up everything they could get their hands on.
I bought 10 AR-15 low receivers when I found out Obama was going to win.
Anyone wants to talk? Raise your hand if you want to talk. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it was crazy the way it went. But even beyond that, I mean, sorry, I lost it because you said that I lost what it would get.
I'm sorry.
No, leave
it up to me.
Created and the boom in price.
The ban. So it's funny because it's tragic as it is, and what people don't realize is that the ban is actually counterintuitive. And the reason for that is that if you remember the Gabrielle Giffords incident when the congresswoman was shot, the gentleman had 30-round magazines, and they jammed because most magazines that are large capacity, not most, but a lot of large capacity magazines are third-party magazines.
Right.
And they're the lower quality. So a lot of people don't like to use larger magazines because they are of a lesser quality, whereas a 10-round magazine is more reliable. So the guy at Virginia Tech who killed many more people was using handguns with 10-round magazines. So they try to say, well, we're going to ban this high-capacity magazine because we don't want you to just be able to fire off, as one guy said, 700 rounds per minute. And we're going to ban all these things. And like New York went crazy on it to where New York actually banned anything higher than 7 rounds in your magazine until they realized that doesn't exist. And the law was actually that if your gun had more than 7 rounds, it was illegal, even though 7-round magazines didn't exist. So they would have to inspect your firearm and be like, okay, you're good. I mean, that's how ludicrous it was. But it actually makes it more lethal. If every spree killer had a 30-round magazine, you'd actually probably have fewer deaths because their guns would jam more often. I mean, that's how it gets ridiculous.
I got to address that real quick. 30 rounds for an AR-15 is like the breed standard. The government has speculations when they procure weapons for the military, and a government spec magazine is usually 30 rounds. When you go to 40 and 50, you experience jams. When you go to drums, 100 rounds.
That's probably what I'm thinking about. Is that the 50 round of the drums?
Yeah, 30 round is the standard AR-15 mag that's issued to everybody in the military. But quite honestly, with a handgun magazine, this was very common, a lot of my friends did this. Is that when you bought the gun during the ban, there was a plug in the magazine at the bottom. Instead of reforming the part, all they did was put a large piece of plastic under the follower. So if you pushed in the mainspring, slid out the butt plate on the magazine, took out the plug, put the follower back in, put the spring back in, and affixed it, you now had a 15-round magazine or whatever it was originally designed for. So it was the easiest thing to overcome. It could be done in 3 seconds without any tools or anything. A ballpoint pen could convert a 7-round magazine into a 15-round magazine. So it's pointless to write legislation to control something that can be undone in 30 seconds or less. I mean, it's just to touch on that point. But go ahead,
Mr. Yeti, if I may.
Sure.
These weapons that we just showed, how hard are they to fire? How much kick do they have to them?
Not at all.
A 67-year-old guy.
An AR-15 has no kick whatsoever. There's very little felt recoil, and it's basically like firing a .22. It's a .22 caliber bullet. So it's
how much manpower would it take to get 22 of those or 18 of those up there? Granted, he was there for 4 days.
Okay, the barrel is made out of.
I mean, how do you transport something like this? Can you do it in a suitcase, a duffel bag?
Absolutely, I could put 15 AR-15s in a very large duffel bag without a problem, and I'd be able to carry it myself. The majority of the AR-15 is made out of aluminum, which is light. The only thing that's heavy on the gun is the barrel. So it's really I would say the average weight of the average AR-15 is probably less than 14 pounds. They're probably 12, 13 pounds a piece. If not less now, because they use all kinds of aluminum components in the rails and the sight system, so they're not very heavy. I would be able to sneak 15 rifles into a hotel. I wouldn't say easily, but
think about that for a second there.
Sure.
This is Las Vegas.
Right.
They have 1,000 cameras everywhere, in every casino, in every hotel, everywhere. There's no way he went through the lobby without them seeing that. Don't get me wrong, it was over 4 days, so they're probably scanning through the video. But there's video of him coming in, how he got to the elevator, what he was transporting, what he was carrying. And beyond that, every one of these weapons had to have a background check. Every single one of them. So we know exactly, at least we don't, the state knows exactly when he purchased every one of these weapons.
Okay, for the record, just to touch on that, if I go to a gun show in the state of Florida and if I make a private purchase as a private individual, if I buy a weapon from another private individual, I just hand him money and he hands me the gun. It depends on where the gun show is located. The municipalities all have different laws, but it's possible to obtain weapons without background checks. If they were purchased in a store or from a federally licensed firearm dealer, not only would they perform a background check, he would also have to fill out a specific form. I forgot the number of the form. They'll be able to trace every weapon back to the original purchaser, but because of the ability to do private sales, sometimes you don't have a complete chain of custody for that individual weapon.
But that's always the case. I mean, there's going to be cases where things are bought black market, things are bought illegally, Sure. I mean, technically, if you buy a firearm, you still have to get it drossed over to you. You still have to go through a federal background check before you can buy it. And you would actually, at least here in California, in a lot of places, you have to still go. Like if you were to come here to just sell me a firearm, we would have to go to a gun store and make sure that I was legally able to own one before you could sell it. Do people do that illegally? Absolutely. But
you think some heads are gonna roll because of some of these
sales and purchases,
firearms that have been purchased?
Not unless some of them were stolen. I would say that would cause heads to roll. But the majority, basically when I sold a gun, I filled out a form and I made a phone call. The phone call was to a federal, it was a state employee running a federal background, and they would give me an approval number. That approval number would go on the form itself, and then all of the guns would be logged in and out of a logbook as they were brought into the store and taken out of the store, be them pawns, sales, purchases, or whatever. So in order for them to go back to the very beginning, I'm sure they have some type of digitized system now, but it's still all based on a paper form. And they would have to go back to the original retailer, who may or may not be in business anymore, and pull the actual yellow form that the original customer of that weapon filled out. So the ATF can do that, but the odds on them tracking down all 43 guns originations are going to be challenging. It's going to take some fucking man hours, let me tell you. Somebody's getting some overtime.
But maybe, but so several of these firearms, based on the pictures, like there's a couple that look like they're Daniel Defense firearms. Those haven't been around. Those haven't been around that long. I think actually you're right. I think Daniel Defense actually came out and said that they were theirs, and they were like, they were appalled. But those haven't been around that long. So I own a firearm. The state knows I have it, so I won't say what it is or anything. But it is all digital now. It is all digitized. Like you have to go in there, you fill out the paper form, they punch it in. It gets sent, immediately transmitted. The ATF knows you have it. It comes back with your background check. You have 10 days or whatever to come pick it up. But they immediately know if you can buy it or not in a lot of jurisdictions. Now, whether that's the case or not, we'll find out at some point. But my suspicion is that he didn't buy these illegally. They weren't private purchases. He probably
he had money. He definitely had money. We know that. So
you walk into
all right, can we? All right. So here's like one of the only other pictures that we can find of this guy. What the fuck? Who is this guy in the age of social media and camera technology everywhere? And he's in Vegas when casinos, they have the probably facial recognition and the most high-tech security photos. Why do we only have two pictures of this guy and another one with him is supposedly dead? Like, what the fuck? I mean, you can tell this one's old. Look at the heat marks on it. Or I think that's what the heat marks. This might even be like a
thumbtacks. Put on a board. Somebody put a thumbtack through it.
Well, it's one of those questions where, based on his age, he's like 68 years old or something.
And he's younger than that in this picture. So
but I'm saying based on his current age, the likelihood that if he's a solo guy, he's divorced without not living with his kids or whatever, there's a very good chance he's not on social media, because I know several gentlemen of his age that aren't. They don't use Facebook. They don't use Twitter. They're not social media guys.
There's pictures of him. My dad's not on Facebook, but there's a ton of pictures of him I don't know.
I have family.
I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I'm just saying it seems funny to me.
I'm 42 years old, and I've never had Facebook. I never had MySpace. I started out on Periscope, and then the only reason I have Twitter is because of Periscope. So I've probably been on social media for about 2 years. So the first 40 years of my life, I was completely against it. And a lot of the bad stuff that happens on Periscope and Twitter, people utilize Facebook to get pictures of your family, to get names of employers and stuff like that. I've never been the type of guy to put that stuff out there. If you're a private person and you appreciate privacy, you don't want to advertise personal stuff that can be turned on you. So I think it's extremely possible. The guy just had a zero social media footprint. He had a zero criminal record. I mean, absolutely nothing. No contact with police ever in his life. Never had a phone call. Never had a...
I think he had a traffic violation is what they said was dealt with in court. Okay. But I've had that.
Sure. Who hasn't?
But that's the issue, is that the only reason I use, like now, because I do a podcast and everything else, I use Facebook and Twitter and all that now. But over years I didn't, because if I don't want to share every aspect of my life. I don't want Facebook data mining everything that I do, or Google or whoever. I understand that. So the idea that he's not on social media doesn't surprise me. The idea that people, if he's not in contact with people that are constantly tweeting everything out or Instagramming anything, it doesn't surprise me. We don't see many more pictures. What more surprises me is that we haven't gotten anything from the police or the authorities on this, because even if you don't know when he came and went, and even if you had to scan through all the hours of security footage for the 4 days he was at that hotel, we know when he checked in. We know when he was in his room, because all of that's key card now. Vegas is all electronic, especially at Mandalay Bay. It's all electronic key card. Yep. We know exactly.
We know when he checked out too.
Yeah, we know exactly when he checked in. We know exactly when he entered the room. We know when he left his room. So we have camera footage of him doing all of those things, and nothing's been released. I mean, just a couple videos of him coming in.
You
with
would have thought by today, which is Wednesday, and it happened Sunday night, that there would be security film. I mean, in these other instances, we've had more evidence or more stuff to be like, okay, than we have now, and no clear motive either. But by this time, we had figured out that San Bernardino shooters were, of Muslim faith, and they were targeting, whoever. A lot of this stuff is in plain sight because they have a social media, presence and about whatever they're doing. But in this case,
the worst part,
we got one picture with a guy with his eyes closed. We've got another one that's clearly old. And then another one with his guy apparently blew out his brains, but there's no brain matter. So let me ask both of you. I thought I was bringing Michael on because he knew about guns, but Joshua, I had no idea that you're a gun guy too. So, pistol in the mouth, you can see it laying next to him. Wouldn't there be some kind of brain matter also?
If he was standing up, probably not. It would have got if it was a large enough hole to fly brain matter behind him. If he hit the ground, it wouldn't necessarily be like leaking out of the back of his head or whatever. It all depends on how he shot himself, where he shot himself, trajectory, all of that.
Not only just to describe what happens when an AR, if he used an AR-15 and not a 308.
Well, there's a handgun next to him and one.
Yeah, it's a pistol.
So a pistol creates. If he had a 45, I'm guessing it's a pretty large wound channel, and if it exited his skull, the majority of all the parts, pieces, and residual pieces probably wound up against a wall or far from his body because of the force of him firing the weapon. But what you're seeing is I would say 10% of the picture. It's almost the same as the information that has been brought out. If whatever newspaper in England released those pictures, they were vetted heavily before they did so because they wouldn't want to jeopardize or I can't come up with the word. They wouldn't want to jeopardize the investigation.
Supposedly they were leaked.
Well, right. Yeah, but they were leaked by somebody.
Supposedly they were leaked.
But they were clearly leaked by
strikes me as funny.
No, they were leaked by somebody.
I'm going to have to excuse myself 2 seconds.
Okay, go for it.
So one of the things to bring up that you're sort of alluding to, Travis, is that the problem with the lack of information is that it leads to crazy and some legitimate and or crazy conspiracy theories. And that's what ends up being the problem, is that we don't know. We look at that and we say, how did somebody fire that many rounds, and how did somebody do that? Why would he break open 2 windows if he wasn't firing for most of them? And what was that on the 4th floor with that strobe light? Was it a muzzle flash, or was it a strobe light that people said it was in that window that had been going on all weekend? I mean, we don't have any information.
But the strobe light seemed pretty consistent with the fire, unless someone doctored the video.
Well, it also seemed very inconsistent for a strobe light, more importantly, because strobe lights are on a time loop electronically. So it actually seems too inconsistent for a strobe light for a lot of people, is what I've seen. But the problem is it goes beyond that. I had somebody last night, 2 people last night when I was at a city event, that said that the event, that what happened didn't happen at all, just like Sandy Hook. Like the government's like conspiring and creating these entire events. And you go, that's how far down the rabbit hole people go with it, because there's a lack of information.
I know someone, and he even comes on here sometimes, but we don't really talk about false flag stuff. He was actually involved in the false flag, and he at first was saying yeah, this is funny. This is funny. And then the next morning, when the real evidence of the photos of the bodies laying there, he's like, all right. Yeah.
Well, I was talking to somebody about that today, and I was like,
But now he's saying, all right. So now his theory is that remember the Bundy standoff in Oregon?
Yes.
If we're going to go down the rabbit hole, he's saying that those guys are also from Mesquite, Nevada, and they're gonna try and ban semi-assault rifles, and they're going to put metal detectors in Las Vegas hotels now because of this.
Well, the fact that they'll put metal detectors in hotels wouldn't surprise me at all. That would be. They do that. There are metal detectors. There are metal detectors at Disneyland now.
And real quick, I heard an interview on NPR in the car. A former Navy SEAL who was the director of security for one of the large casino groups explained some of the tactics that they use to provide security for the guests that come to Las Vegas back and forth to the hotels. And in addition to gunshot detection, they do have metal detectors, but they're not set up in visible areas where it's like where you're walking through the door at the perimeter, point of entry, point of exit. They're probably more like hand wands or certain areas. But with the amount of money that the casinos, the revenue that they produce, they're using not only former special warfare operators from Navy SEALs to direct their security, but they also have the best technology money can buy. Facial recognition software, gunshot detection, electronic means of monitoring, every type of camera you could imagine. The guy, basically, I listened to him for his entire interview, and he basically laid out a pretty solid description of the extent of security that's actually in some of the major hotels already. So,
it's crazy. It's crazy, but they're worried about Danny Ocean getting 10 of his buddies together and robbing them. They're not worried about somebody breaking a window out and shooting at a concert across the street.
I bet all their facial recognition software is of known gamblers or known cheaters or people that are going to, cost them money. It's
absolutely. Those MIT guys that are banned from Vegas, yeah, that's who's pinging on their system.
Sure.
But they still got it. I mean, they still have the info. It's still there.
But if you don't know who you're looking for, and that's the enigma of this Paddock guy, is that you don't know who you're looking for. I mean, one day he's your average gambler.
If the technology is there, can't you just put his face and say, "Look, this is who we're looking for," and then the video will scroll past all that.
You're talking about what happened. Yeah, like for evidence-wise, yeah, there's no reason why they can't pull it up and show us where he was at what time and what hallways he was in and all of that. Absolutely. I was talking about how there's no way to know that he would have done this.
Right. Having no prior criminal record, they probably don't even have his fingerprints on file.
Yeah, but the idea that they have the evidence of what he did while he was in the hotel. He was using whatever her name was. He was using her gambling card. So we know if he was eating at certain restaurants, if he was using that, we know where he was when he was swiping in and out of his hotel room. We know when he checked in. As you said, we know when he checked out. But we know all of that. And that's not hard to pull up. We're not asking for facial recognition. We're asking for what time did he check in? Oh, noon at this time. Okay, well, let's pull up that video. Did he have 19 bags with him? Did he have one duffel bag? What was going on?
Again, they're going to protect the integrity of their investigation no matter what. So I think that given enough time, in due time, as the investigation progresses and proceeds, more information will be released and we'll be able to put a clearer picture together. They'll be able to develop motive. From what I understand, I kind of sat on my hands, like I said. I haven't really been paying too much attention. I want to wait till there's more information gathered before I form,
usually there is.
But that's a question though. What's the incentive of not releasing information unless you believe that there's a grand conspiracy behind this? Well, they told us.
We talked about that before. The us against them theory. They're going to control the flow of information to maintain the integrity of their investigation, because everything that leaks out takes away the element of surprise for them in catching evidence or finding weapons, or every little bit of information that leaks out in a digital age becomes searchable, researchable. So they try to limit the release of absolutely everything, and it pisses off the public. And here we are.
Yeah, but that's the entire problem that we've had. And this isn't a new problem. I mean, I'll point to, and I don't want to do this, but I will. I'll point to the JFK assassination, where they didn't release entire troves of information. They were supposed to be released in the 90s under Clinton, and they pushed it back by another 17 years. They're supposed to be released this year in 2017, and all of a sudden, although that book doesn't exist, all of a sudden, book 5 of 7 doesn't exist anymore, whatever the number is. And so you have this issue where we have a history of the government hiding information and lying to us, and it allows this conspiracy shit to fly, when in reality, if they just came forward and said, here's what we have, here's what we know so far, and not just speculative nonsense, like here's a picture of him checking in with 3 bags, or here's every time he went to his room, and here's the bags he had, here's how he transported the weapons. Even those little crumbs would make the public believe that law enforcement was A, investigating, B, being forthright, and C, that their narrative was true. Because I know all these people that believe A, they believe that the event didn't happen, which is just ludicrous to me, or they believe that he was a patsy, or he wasn't the shooter, or whatever else. You can put most of that to rest if you release information in a matter. And this isn't 1960. This is the 24-hour news cycle. Like, people are on it now. I mean, you got 4chan and CNN, or 4chan and Reddit, and all these guys that are out there just digging into this stuff. And the sooner you get information, the sooner you get information in their hands, the sooner you can mitigate the sort of anti-societal mentality where people are like, I can't trust my government. Like, why do you believe that the moon landing was faked? Well, because they lied to us about JFK, or they lied to us about the Iran coup in 1953, or they lied to us about the Iran-Contra, or all these things they literally lied to us about. So now I can't trust them on anything. And the more you pull back on that data, the more you do that, where you close ranks and you have that us versus them mentality, the more you turn society against the state. And by being against the state, you're against your own people, because the state is made up of our people. And that's where I have a problem with it.
Correct.
I think they create more doubt with their means and methods. But it is literally, the investigators are not only investigating all the elements of the situation that took place, they're also doing everything in their power to keep it in a very tight circle where it won't get leaked out. I have a question for you. If they did release more information, or if they kept us a little bit more up to date, do you think that would decrease the amount of conspiracy theories or increase the amount of conspiracy theories?
Well, it depends on what the information is.
Right. Well, of course. But based on that, I think it would add to the more information people have, the more questions they're going to ask, the more skeptical they're going to be.
Well, I don't know. I think it would decrease it to a point, and I say that because I know people who I consider to be fairly reasonable, who all of a sudden started talking about how the event didn't happen, and just Occam's razor, it did. But the problem is that by having such a dearth of, or a lack of information, it allows things to not be swatted down. So think about it like I got a guy in this city that I live in who runs for office all the time, who believes the earth is flat. And what'd you do? I thought that was a joke online. I didn't realize there were people that actually believe this, but he does. And the more information you have, the more you can swat down what they say. But if you leave it all open and you say, trust us. Now, mind you, this is a government, this is a country built on the premise that we don't trust our government. I mean, that's why the 9th and 10th Amendments exist, because if the government can't do it, they can't do it. Don't trust them. As we said earlier, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. We don't trust our government. So when the government closes ranks and said, trust us, all it does is lead people who are normally rational to now listen to the crazy. Yeah. And you just amplify the crazy.
NASA isn't real.
Trust me is often translated in your brain housing group as fuck you.
Yes.
I the term fuck me as pejorative. It's almost, you can't say the term trust me in a business transaction without automatically questioning why that person wants you to trust them. So it's become almost like a cliche of sorts.
So play that.
Trust me on this one. Trust me on this one.
No. A buddy of mine who I used to find it hilarious when he used to do this. We used to go to stores, and he'd pull out his credit card, and they asked for ID, and he'd look at them and go, "What? Don't you trust me?" And they would just have this look of panic on their face, like, I don't know what to do now. And he was just screwing with them, obviously. But like, whenever they ask for your ID, like, you go to buy a beer or something, like, "Can I see your ID?" Like, what? Don't you trust me?
And I asked him, "Do you also want my phone number?"
You know, half the time they'll just go, because it is that sort of pejorative of, oh, you just said F me, and now I feel like an a-hole. So it's just that problem. But whenever the government says trust me, it immediately leads people who are normally rational, willing to listen to reason, people, and makes them go, ugh.
Well, you've been waiting for to be stopped by customs or something like that, isn't that right, Joshua? So
I've been stopped by. Yeah. I've actually been waiting for ever since I saw the videos. I've been waiting for Border Patrol to stop me and be like, so I could say, "Am I being detained?"
Yeah, I usually have some kind of beer or some kind of weed on me or something, so I'm like, nah, just let me go.
Yeah, right. Can you let me slide?
I've been stopped by customs before. It's a crap situation to be in. You know, sitting there for hours as they tear your vehicle apart for nothingness. At least if I was doing something illegal, it's justified. But I'm like, I did nothing. I get no enjoyment later when you find nothing. So this sucks. But no, but at least
they're like, we know about you. We know about you. Okay.
Yeah, but the point is that you're like, there's
look at your beard. It must be bad.
Please pull aside.
I've never gone through a customs checkpoint in a car, but I do get molested every time I go to the airport by TSA. For some reason, I'm a sweaty guy. You know, I tend to sweat. And when you walk through that little sniffer room, what it actually, not only is it trying to detect explosive residue or traces of nitrogen, it's also geared to measure perspiration, because a nervous bomber is going to be sweating. So anybody who goes through that sniffer goes to secondary screening. And my girlfriend was standing there looking at the screen on the sniffer, and as I walked through, was a small patch right above my butt where my backpack was. So I got molested because I sweat. But literally every time I fly, I get felt up pretty good, and they don't mind doing it.
But think about that in context of what we're talking about. You got the TSA, the Transportation Theater Organization, that likes to pretend like they're doing something. And then my favorite bit of comedy on that was when it said, so you go to the TSA, and you have a bottle that has more than a certain number of ounces in it, and they take that because it might be a bomb, and they put it in the trash can right next to them with all the other things that might be bombs, and they put it in the most compacted area with the most people in the airport, because we want all of the bombs to be next to all of the people that are here, and so they fail. It's like 75-80% of the time that you can get weapons and things through. Like I think his name is Schneider, who works or security, who can a guy strapped an AK-47 to himself in pieces to see if he can get through security as a test, and he did. I mean, it's all a joke. But think about that. Think about that overreaction. Like they have a sniffer worried about sweat because a bunch of guys got into the locking the cockpit door stops what happened on 9/11. And yet you have to be molested because of sweat. Every time I go through security, it pisses me off for two reasons. One, they molest me for whatever reason because they can't get enough of me. They pat me down, wand me, whatever else. But secondarily, 3 of the last 5 times I've flown, I forgot that I had a folding knife in my camera bag, and it got through security every time. Not checked luggage, like regular luggage. Like they go through and they're like, "What's in your bag?" And I'm like, "That's a camera, that's a charger, that's an iPod or whatever." And then I get to I went to New York. I get to this 2008. I get to New York and I'm going through my bag. And I'm like, "Oh, I had a knife in here." Like they just completely missed it. So it just pisses me off even more because they're molesting me on the pretext of security, and yet not catching the things that it's based on.
And so, let's be real, they could really care less. I mean, they couldn't care less about even what they're talking about the Lakers. If you're in LAX, they just couldn't give a shit about what's really going on.
But even if they did care, there are ways around it. Like there are always going to be ways to do horrible things. I said this earlier. Like you had the truck attack in Nice. You had the pressure cookers at the Boston Marathon. There's always a way to do horrible things. And the problem you run into is that you get an incident like what we're talking about with Vegas, where we go, "Oh my God, this man did a horrible thing with these tools. So let's ban. We don't know why he did it. We couldn't have stopped him with this. So let's ban the tools." But if he had decided, you know what, there's a country concert happening over by a McLaren airport. What if I stole a Peterbilt or a Mack truck and I drove it into that audience? one, there's a chance he could have taken out more people, but nobody would have said, you know what, we need to ban trucks. Even if you ban all of the scary guns or you get rid of everything else, you're not going to get rid of the underlying problem of the fact that people suck.
That's pretty much on the money.
You can't stop crazy.
Unfortunately, not only can you stop crazy, but you can't stop stupid. And if stupid was able to recognize that crazy was crazy, then we'd all be okay. There was a theory once presented that everybody on the planet can be divided into three groups. You're either a sheep that follows the flock, that doesn't intentionally harm others, or you're a wolf that will mercilessly feed upon the sheep, or you're a sheepdog who basically makes sure that the sheep are protected and the wolves are pursued. So, taking that account into theory, if you break everybody up into those three categories, there's really no explanation. People are going to do terrible things to people, no matter what happens, whether life is good for them or bad for them, whether their economy is doing well, whether our constitutional rights are upheld, whether they ban guns, whether they build a wall.
Can I be a baby sheep? I'd like to be a baby sheep.
You can be a sheep. You can be a baby sheep. You'd rather
thank you.
A sheepdog.
The fundamental question to ask is, do the benefits outweigh the negatives? And so the question there is, if we have a society, and I'm gonna blame the left because they piss me off so much right now. If we have a society that's based on race baiting and divide and conquer and destroy everything, then no, the benefits do not outweigh the risks. Everybody's against each other. But if you have a society that's a meritocracy, where you believe that people should be able to succeed on their own behalf, where we understand that the idea behind income mobility is more important than income inequality, because you can rise and succeed as your skill set and as your work lets you, and we believe in those sort of things, then we ask ourselves, well, what's the benefit of having firearms? And the benefit of having firearms is both for self-protection, because as I said earlier, the Supreme Court has said that the government is not required to protect you, but also to protect your neighbors. So if something does happen, it's like, I'll go back to California. Here in California, one of the reasons why open carry is illegal, concealed carry was illegal, was because the Black Panthers stormed the Capitol building legally carrying firearms, and people shit themselves and made it illegal. And for all of the issues with the Black Panthers notwithstanding, one of the things that they believed in was self-protection, because they believed that the police weren't protecting them, and in some instances that was absolutely the truth. And so they believe that they should be able to protect their own neighborhoods. And if you apply that to all of the highest crime areas in the United States, to Chicago, where they have 60, what is it? Last year they had 749 homicides. You apply that to D.C., which was the murder capital of the United States until Chicago eclipsed them. You apply that to Los Angeles and San Jose and all these places where murder is rampant. And you say, you know what? We want honest citizens to be armed to protect their neighborhoods, so these criminal elements can't ruin lives, can't take lives. So we know that people can feel like they're can be protected, and we want. And honestly, as an enthusiast, and I believe that Yeti will agree with me on this, as an enthusiast, you don't just want to drop Saturday night specials into people's backyards, with drones from Amazon. You want people to be properly trained and to know what's going on, and to know that, what the safest actions are and how to deal with them and how to do things and how to protect things, how to keep things locked and safe and everything else. But if you have that, people can protect themselves. And if you believe that, we can come together as a society. But instead, we have the media and everybody else running a narrative of we're all different, we hate each other, we'll never get along, and these weapons.
Well, that's why we'll never be able to combat our government, even if we do have automatic weapons. We will never come together from one cause, because we're so divided already that we can't come together on anything.
I agree.
We gotta. In closing, my audio editing program limits me to 2 hours. Granted, we can do more, but we would have to cut it off. We got to cut it off soon. We can do another one if you want, but
I feel like
this is great. This was great.
I mean, just to address your point about even if we had all the weapons in the world, we wouldn't be able to resist the government. I kind of agree, because we wouldn't have planes, we wouldn't have boats with the capability to enable gunfire, we wouldn't have advanced weapon systems, we don't have the capability to gather intelligence, we don't have satellites, we don't have some of the technology that the government, and only the government, has access to. So that would be a pretty steep hill to climb. However, when the Constitution was written, none of this technology existed. So that should be taken into consideration as well.
Are you aware of Millennium Challenge? Are you aware of the Millennium Challenge? It was a war games that took place dealing with like Iraq and whatnot.
No, sir.
Okay, so what happened was there were two teams, as there always are. There's a red team and the blue team. I don't remember who was who, but the U.S. team used all of our tactics, and another U.S. general was in charge of the opposing team, which was sort of your jihadist group. And he didn't use cell phones. He used people and animal travel to send. It's called Millennium Challenge, to send messages. It was a war game. And he used small boats.
Horse and pony messengers. Horse and pony messengers.
Yes. And he used small boats, and he ended up sinking the war game U.S. fleet, because he used tactics because our government and our military is so reliant on satellite technology and all of these things. He basically won the war game, and the government didn't like the answer to that, so they reset it and took away half of what he had done so they could win the war game.
Wow.
So
you know what? If we get like anonymous and those crazy kind of like, so there are a lot of fields of
Wolverines.
Yeah, where the government is trying to keep up with the private sector in a lot of areas. So you know, I don't know if we get the brightest hacker minds to shut down all their computers, then how much power do they really have? I've already been shadow banned on Twitter and shit. This is going to send it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I've already seen people who post like schematics of like, here's the NSA facility in Utah, and here's where their water towers are. And if they don't have these water towers in this river inlet, all of their computers will overheat and they can't do anything. Like, people are already that far ahead thinking about these sort of things. So that's why I say, are there people, I mean, think about it in the terms of like World War II with the Nuremberg trials. Are there people who will absolutely follow orders to the ends of the earth and do the most horrible, despicable things? Sure, there always will be those people. Doesn't matter where they're from, they always will exist. But on the flip side, are there also those guys like here in Las Vegas who was flipping off the building? Like, are those people who have zero fucks to give and will not put up with that? I have enough faith. I have enough faith in my fellow man that we have enough Marines and enough operators and enough guys that will look at that and go, "You have got to be shitting me," and stop it and do the right thing. And maybe my hope is misplaced, but I believe that there are enough men and women in this country that will do the right thing and go, "You know what? No, we're not going to follow that order. We're not going to do that thing. We're more interested in because right now we have to question that enemies, foreign and domestic. Who is the actual enemy?"
Right.
And that's my question.
And believe it or not, this all ties back into the Second Amendment, which has been brought into question since this atrocity, this crazy slaughtering of Americans. So, in closing, I would just like to say, let's be diligent. I hope some more information comes out that will put this at ease. As much as I mourn and think about all the young people, I mean, it was mostly young people. Young people attending a concert. It's terrible. There's still a big part of me that just would like to put this whole thing together in my brain. And in closing, either of you got something to say about it?
Real quick, let me just grab what you said. Putting it together in your brain. I think that's what we're all striving to do, is understand more of the situation and how and why it happened. And the powers that be aren't necessarily sharing that information with us. So it's only human nature for people to try to piece things together and come to some type of conclusion so that they can gain the closure and get past the actual tragedy. Listen, my heart goes out to all the victims, and my heart goes out to all the first responders. Listen, it's not easy running towards the gunfire, and I love you guys. I respect what you do on a daily basis, and the paramedics as well, and the doctors and the nurses, and the civilians and good Samaritans that did everything in their power to help their fellow man. That's what we need more of, and unfortunately, it's become politicized, and it's now going to be used as a wedge to divide us even more. The very fact that people come together during a tragedy to tell you not to politicize specific aspects of the tragedy to divide people. So thank you guys. Thank you for having me, guys. I really enjoyed my time. And go ahead.
I would say I agree. I would ask that people look into, I mean, the people that were the victims of this, both the people who lost their lives and were injured, but also the family members of those people are spread out throughout the country. I mean, there's one gentleman from Alaska, one from British Columbia, one for a couple.
Two from Bakersfield right here. Two, Bakersfield's a country music mecca.
Yeah, so some people from out here where I am, just if there's, besides just, running to the Red Cross donating blood, look at the, just search GoFundMe or search the names and see if there's a way that you can help, because these people have to have funeral costs and they have to, their lives have been turned upside down. I sort of want to close with it's a meme, and I apologize to a point, but I want to close something my wife shared with me because it's sort of nice. I like it. And it said, I pray that 58 beautiful souls who started off at a Jason Aldean show woke up to the most amazing Tom Petty concert.
Oh,
that's awesome.
Yeah, Tom Petty.
So I feel we need to remember that before, while everybody's out there, like my California politicians or a former failed presidential candidate Hillary Clinton are out there demagoguing this issue, there were people, both first responders who are law enforcement or not, who are paramedics or not, standard citizens and not, who were out there trying to help their fellow citizens, people who were trying to help each other out. I mean, that's what our country is. I mean, many of us, whether you're military or non, like myself, I'm non-military, but I've been in situations where I've seen horrific car crashes that I've stopped for. And I've seen moments that have been, the worst of people's lives that you stop and help for because it's the right thing to do. And that's what binds us. The a-holes that are dividing us, ignore them. Where it doesn't, demagoguing things and running on emotion and trying to divide us doesn't help anything. And the more we can come together, the better. So that's what I would ask of people, is just look at this and see how you can help, and try to see if you want to help out. Look at the families and look at the people that are hurting the most and see if there's a way that you can help them, because they are just, their entire lives have been turned upside down.
So Mark Levin is promoting a good GoFundMe if you go to his website. And for me, just, this just kind of reminds you how short life can be, even for some young people. So, if you love someone, give them a hug, let them know that you love them, because tomorrow's never promised and life can be so short for some of us people. And for anyone that's still listening on the docket, we got another race relations coming up next week, and this one's going to be heated. We've got two people that called each other out, and they're going to go at it. So I'm just going to have to take a step back and just roll the ball down the hill. But next week we got another heated race relations episode coming up, and I appreciate the fuck out of both of you guys coming on. Mr. Yeti, you were just about as good as I hoped you would be, and even expectations exceeded. And Josh Ferguson bringing that heat every single time. Thank you.
Guys, this is my first podcast too.
Oh, stop it. You do Periscope all the time. All right, so for anyone that's still listening, he's under Miss_Yeti right now on Periscope. Go check that dude out. He's great. Josh Ferguson of the Hourly Struggle podcast. I recommend that one. You'll learn more from that podcast than you will on this one. I guarantee it. And shout out to people in France, because people in France seem to love this podcast. So I love the hell out of you guys too. On that note, we will be out here. Bonjour. Bonjour.
How do you like?